Sheila here with Sirius Dallas Moon, and I've been pondering about Ketu going through Magha Nakshatra, that it's associated with, and the upcoming approach of Rahu to the last decan of Aquarius. I know that we're still 6 degrees from there, but in terms of the nakshatra, we are already bordering the the same the same effect or the same lunar mansion. And I've discussed a lot how Ketu going through Magha is purging kind of the sins of the founding fathers. Okay, basically the purging the misconduct, because a lot of people don't think about the fact of what kind of a grand relief it is for the people listed on the Epstein files, for the Epstein files to be out. And they don't have to pretend that they're not there. They don't have to pretend that they're this benevolent giver that is the amazing lover that is when they were raped since infanthood. They don't have to pretend that they're here to provide for human rights where they never had. And anywhere they would turn to replenish would be another power trap or power bait. Think about it. If we know that, let's say, Stormy Daniels was raped and trafficked, it's kind of like, well, that is erotically a match to somebody who was also not sexually sovereign. And that's how cheating happens. Um, Probably raped and trafficked by the Epsteins. So, but this is Ketu going through Magha. Rahu going through the first decan of Pisces and the last decan of Aquarius is materializing. And this is going to be the hour of those Pisces placements and those Aquarius placements. And when I think about those Pisces placements and those Aquarius placements, Aquarius, that was the chart for the people that saved the children from the Nazi regime, and we don't know if they saved them or trafficked them. And by the way, the person saving them wouldn't know if they're saving them or trafficking them. This is the decan that in Pisces is most associated with Fomelhaut, that is the wisdom of the deep. The psychic awareness. A lot of us, with Rahu going through this, are materializing the awareness of the depth of the ocean. And with Rahu approaching Aquarius, which would be Ketu on the Leo part of Magha Nakshatra, we're going to be looking at Davos more than at the Vatican. at JP Morgan's role around the years in what would later become the Epstein, more than at, let's say, blaming the raped as being unvirtuous. Or the rapist. The issue of the rapist is not being unvirtuous, but committing an action that is negating sovereignty, the sense of self, and its own pride and legacy. Okay? People with great vices can still become great women and men. But when we commit an action that negates our self-trust, sovereignty, and a sense of pride and legacy, then this is beyond a clergy or patriarchal. You think about the son as patriarchal question. But it's a purging the glory question. But with that purging the glory, with that loss of ideation, comes an actual more authentic. When those scandals are being exposed, comes something actual more authentic. Of course, we cannot have an empire that is prosperous and sovereign and benevolent when this is the upbringing of the leaders. Rahu in the nakshatra in Aquarius that is most associated with Deneb Algedi materializes the awareness of Deneb Algedi's wealth redistribution and the sacrifice star. It is going to materialize the exposure of, if you think about when Rahu was in Capricorn, and the materialization of the exposure of the hidden hierarchy of power. And so here it's going to be the materialization of the exposure of the sacrifices in the JP Morgans, the sacrifices in the system that is supposed to wealth redistribute. If I think about, there's nothing more Davos. No, no, thank you. Yeah, but not enough. There is nothing more Davos or Wefi than the notion of the idea, the fact that this is where ideas such as universal basic income are funneled through side by side with one will own nothing and be happy. But this is where the courtesan-partisan division that we had in Magha is exposed as the sacrifice on the altar of economy that has been affecting wealth itself. The people that were born into child rape traditions were the sacrifice on the altar of their so-called glory. And purging that glory is also purging that altar and also purging that sacrifice. Rahu with Deneb Algedi will expose the global economy arena of that sacrifice, and remind us that ideas such as universal basic income are achieved by abolishing rape and ritual sacrifice. Just like the glory of the Epstein list was achieved by sacrifice and then was purged and dissolved, neither do we want the concept of universal basic income to be achieved by child rape or child sacrifice or human rape or human trafficking. And this set of eclipses would really expose that those altars and those sacrifices. What were these people that were raped since childhood to become child rapists and then members in the Epstein network building? What could be built out of such upbringing? Rape cannot be serving as a venue for liberation from a ghetto. Well, they can't say it. Well, this is the transit when we do say it. Not because of shame and virtue, but because rape negates sovereignty. And if we are to grant sovereignty, we are to abolish rape. My prediction on a mundane level, or where does it meet different countries? So, the big three, Israel, United States, and Netherlands. Um, why am I saying the big three? Because when it comes to the West, the Haag, big devil, little devil. And we're not sure which is which. Brussels be like, we managed to get away with that. For United States, it's third house. And it's very difficult to say neighboring countries, but Canada can be. The many countries that comprise the southern part of the Americas can be. For Israel, it is fifth house. Children of Yemen. Pluto ingress into the fifth house of Israel in general is exposing, but with is exposing a lot of the ritual abuse of children within Israel. And Deneb Algedi is very likely going to bring us a profound chapter that has to do with the relation between the ritual abuse of children in Israel and, because Aquarius is global, and global trade. I don't now. Here's the thing. I live in Israel. I have no idea what it is. I know about the kidnapping of the children of Yemen. I know that there is ritual abuse of children like everywhere, so also in Israel. I know that the Epstein, people were talking about, oh, the Epstein was hosted by Israel and so on and so forth, but it was kind of hosted by all the countries, and and of course those things are associated with global trade. But I don't know what will that, what would that bring in terms of exposure and awareness. Rahu brings in something new. For example, in the Capricorn, in the global Capricorn, when Rahu was in Capricorn, or Pluto to Capricorn, Rahu was in Capricorn, the global corporate ladder was, wait a second, we did not have um, uh, narcissistic abuse syndrome in the DSM because most of the training to be psychiatrist and psychologist, which are the professions that work together in the age of Pluto sextile Neptune, they took such training that required them to be narcissists to sustain even the academic training. I'm not even talking about like networks. The race to the clinic in psychology and the years of training as psychiatrist made it almost impossible to not have some sort of an combination of antisocial properties, but they have to have a narcissistic, because narcissistic is depending on human relations because of a wound to do with their own upbringing. So the psychiatric calling in itself was narcissistic, and so we did not have narcissistic abuse syndrome in the psychiatric DSM, because that would be a level of curation for the psychiatrist that would negate the Epstein files. Maybe now there are psychiatrists that can look um, at their own self and say, wait a second, as psychiatrists, a lot of psychiatrists have to be medicated, for example. When I was studying the second course of aromatherapy, we had a psychiatrist in class. And he was the one looking into like essential oils and how these things affect, and even astrology. Um, and then we have really profound challenging of the DSM. The clinging into the um, the DSM as validation, or the identity validation as disease, even neurodivergence, and all of these. How should I say that? All of these are, it's not bypassing, but they fall apart. And even in the ghettos, they create ghettos for the neurodivergent, the disabled, the this, the that. And at the core issue is, hey, rape is not normal. We find, and I'm absolutely, I'm one of the most guilty of this. It's not just my fault, because when people try to talk about rape, let's say in the astral, then they immediately people are concerned with whether something is in the physical or in the astral and so on and so forth. And I met people that were even emotionally abused and felt that that was worse than the physical abuse and rape that they went through. And on the other hand, it's not like we were. And then there are people that went through emotional abuse and rape by not addressing or by somebody not honoring their sexual boundaries, and then they compared it to an experience where they had more aggressive violation and hatred. And then they say, well, that's not rape, that was rape. and people now, the funding behind, let's say, the healing professions, because Saturn is with Neptune. This is why psychiatry shows up so much. Neptune rules psychiatry. But also when it comes to channeling and divination. לא, זה לתחינה, לשייק, זה מיועד לשייק. זה מיועד לשייק, אפשר ככה להשתמש. Amazing. And so if Rahu in Capricorn was bringing us the public, it was one of the things that were more grassroots ever. Authentically. Just put it there, that like that is okay. It's okay. It's meant for that. It's okay. לא. When you buy particular for shake frozen fruits and then that causes the problem. Now, what was new is that it was authentically grassroots because the psychiatrists did not know what narcissistic abuse was, and then the people that had to tend to that in their relationships, in their workplace, they began to tend to that. And now the people that were suddenly, it was like, what am I suddenly being diagnosed? We're like, first of all, it was like, but it's a DSM diagnosis. And then it was like, well, but what is narcissism? Is the children that was raped and ritually abused and grew into the Epstein list. But they can't say it. How do you curate narcissism? You drop the Peter rings. And so Rahu in Capricorn, people talked about gaslighting. Now, once they talk about gaslighting in their relationships, it's also in their workplaces, and people require to be treated well. Boom, me too. Of course, that pertains to the economy, to the political relations, the civilian relations. Oh, our leader is gaslighting us. Our leader is narcissist. If you grew up in an Epstein farm, then what do you? If you grow tomatoes, you wouldn't. You grow tomatoes. And so Rahu going through Deneb Algedi. I set the tone for that. No, here's the thing. Pluto was still in Capricorn. And that Me Too thing was terrible. And I noticed that I ran into that a lot in my life. So of course, a normal human being is trying to make better choices in life, do all the shadow work, all these things. And then, it's kind of like the more I go into the shadow work, the more I run into that. So eventually, when that already happened in therapy, then I asked myself, why does it look like all these people that they call narcissists are manufactured in Ford? I knew nothing about the cloning farms. It's like all these people had, I'm not saying exact same because each person is an individual, but it had something about their upbringing that was the exact same pattern. Yeah, they all went through ritual abuse. And all the things that people were blaming one another in, well, how do I develop a relation that is secure attachment? Or why does one feel relation with particular type of people? But then because they manufacture a situation where relation is impossible. Now, Rahu Deneb Algedi is really going to address the business sector of this issue. For example, the banks that were involved, they were cooperative. And this is going to expose the moshavs and kibbutz and all those settlements and the rape as salvation. um, and intentional community, because it's a community sign. And the erosion of sovereignty by the ritual abuse that happens in those communities. Um, and this is, including, by the way, anything scientific revolution, experimentation, and even astrology. Neptune is more the divination part of astrology, but Saturn is with Neptune here. And Aquarius is more like looking at this thing. And here's the thing. When you look at this thing and predict the sky, it's kind of like looking at, it's a navigator looking at their map and predicting so that we can have awareness. I'm not going to say smoother flight, but a smoother flight is more about the awareness that there is turbulence, that we know to identify turbulence, and that we know to internally accommodate. But it's also about, hey, we didn't actually have to have turbulence here. This type of turbulence is inorganic, which is not necessarily a good or bad thing. Um, and Aquarius is also very associated modernly with Uranus for a reason. Try to regulate an Aquarius, it acts odd. For example, there was an attempt to rebel against me being an astrologer. I really hope astrologers were not involved, because there's nothing more incompetent than trying to regulate somebody being an astrologer. when it comes to like understanding that astrology is what it is, it's the essence of what it is to begin with. um, what happened when they tried to gatekeep scientific evolution or gatekeep astrology? Exposure of the Gates project. Explode the gates. um, Deneb Algedi here is also the defending of those who are outside of the system. Could you stop interrupting my recording? Thank you. And no problem. Hey, I'm recording. Don't be those weird things of their children. Thank you. There's no way a child can leave their parents' domain without actually shining in the world and making money independently. Dropping the Peter rings is an essential, but also exposing how were the people in the Peter rings manufactured. I'm probably alarmed a lot of moms now. I was like, am I expected that when they begin to become teenagers? Worse. I'm in my 40s, so it's Uranus opposition. And one way I can talk about the Uranus transition, or whether it's a square or opposition, is going through our teenage years, which is another facet of astrology. It's another facet of Aquarius as well. Is going through our teenage years where we've almost completed the cycle of the 12 signs, and the duty of rebelling our parents, and when I say parents, not just the organic parents or the inorganic parents, but also our teachers and their teachings. Uranus in the 10th par excellence. and and the liberation associated with that. It's going. No, absolutely not. It's going through our teenage years again and individuating where we didn't before. Now, it's also understanding why we couldn't individuate before. If, let's say, at 15, a lot of children, by the way, they don't seek to get out of their home at 18. It's kind of like 12, 13, 14 is also the age where in some places they build an entire house or dwelling for the child that came through teenagehood. Like in certain rural villages in Uganda. in Uganda. However, in Israel, that would result in, you know, making that move would become a shili dosirs. I know that at 41 when I'm approaching my Uranus opposition. Making money on my own, and this is also the age where we begin to become entrepreneurial. One of the things I remember when I was at around 12 or 13, I sold my teacher actually a lingerie set. And while I barely had boobs, and that was simply, my parent was selling various clothing or stuff like that, and then the natural thing would be, and this is a form of embarking into with something as natural that learning to make money from my own business. Only in retrospective, I can think about the entire fashion industry, and this also why, not just for me, it's also why my parent business couldn't boom, because then it would be a Jungblut dossiers. They wanted this mother and child to do something different. Rahu going through Aquarius, particularly with Deneb Algedi, is also the star that defends the one that is outside the system. What's a 40 years old man or woman doing in their parents' house? Wait a second. These are the few people that said no to the Epsteins and did not compromise being who they are or doing what they do, but without the peterings. Deneb Algedi is the star that accentuates that. Oh, look at this person. They can't clean themselves. They can't clean their house. They said no to the Epstein ring and insisted on having a sense of self, which means that when that was negated, it means that when they would try to wash themselves, their touch would not feel like their own. When they would try to fix the room, everything would continuously collapse. When they would try to shower, there would be another entity in the shower, and it's not an entity like a spirit or something. It's somebody that was being tortured and projected through the astral. In Aquarius, we talk about these things. When the housing sector is such that the people living in it are continuously not just surveilled, but violated and interrupted, of course, a person can't tend to their own things. And the minute they bring a person and say, hey, let me help you fix that, okay, this is what happens when I try to fix it. I believe a lot of people that are social workers um, or certain teams, when they were refusing to understand that, they would be attacked, because then the teenager that was constricted in a place where they should have been living in their own house safely was constricted in a place, and they're being told that they can't take care of themselves. So the only way to explain that is to begin to show that social worker what it's like. A lot of what we the people experience is what our leaders went through, which further accentuate on the Ketuing of Magha, um, and creates almost a catharsis explosion of all the legacies that were founded on. If I think about times where I had to dematerialize career and tend to, like, my own upbringing, then think about that, but for a king or a tycoon. There is another form, if I think about social media, because, well, social media was really Pluto in Capricorn, and the internet was Neptune in Aquarius. Then, if I think about the way that social media contributed to, let's say, the Arab Spring, there's a different social media right now. And this is the kind of technology occult telepathy interface that's going on between content creators and many, many, many people that didn't have this particular of venue to communicate before, and we're going through tremendously different upbringings, but not completely not connected upbringings. And just like the social media back then was contributing to the Arab Spring, there is a different type of, because if, for example, I saw YouTube favoring content creators to do a show or a series, and if I think about my life and how I started up with things to do with filmmaking, screenwriting, and then moving toward the working sector took me to the place where I need to be a content creator, and I need to, Saturn Neptune, I have to make a movie and run a show if I want to not just sell a product, but even market a podcast. And how this is kind of like what in the past was something that one cannot even dream of, because people make a lot of movies and they don't even know if the movie will be completed or if it will sell, and so on and so forth. Then there was a lot of surrender. It's almost like sailing through the North Sea. And now it's kind of like, oh, we have to make movies. If in the past it was like, oh, this great competition and so on, so it's kind of like, well, we have to. We have to be who we are. We have to do what we came here to do, to even do the things that were the detour, whether it's selling a product or having a business. We're brought back to that entertainment industry, and this is where the revolution against what was happening within the Epstein circles begins. It's kind of like, hey, and I see, and it's possible to hear the frustration. Like I had that little box where you put the money for saving. I remember in one of the times where I was trying to take financial responsibility, so I said, okay, let's buy something like that. And it had a Disney thing. And I saw this anger because people were watching, whether through the Astral or through means that they probably were not supposed to be watching. But anyway, they saw this and they were like showing me what Disney was. And the observation on the person that was coercive is kind of like, that's Disney. And it took me time to connect the thing that stands there and has a Disney on it, and it also and also the notion of the breach of boundaries, and yet the observation and the content of observation. Um, and so is that frustration that explodes out of basically the Epstein's network system of training actors or of training people in general, and consciously or unconsciously repeating intergenerational patterns in and then we have the juxtaposition of a person that's an absolute underdog in the media, meaning they're not even in the media, and people that the media was something that they grew into. And all of us questioning everything. I remember when I talked about ritual abuse, and I was like, one of the people was somehow exposed to that, and it was like, people were growing their children that way. They were, they were growing their children, and then I hear Anya Wick addressing that. Then she went on TikTok and saying, "Wait a second, people talk about Epstein. Her father was doing that to 3 years old." Um, and people having to come out of their entire way of upbringing, where all of us have to come out of the entire way of upbringing. So, and the essence of that was the breach of boundaries from infanthood. It generates a lot of stories. I can tell that, for the people that have had experience with that, it's kind of like we never chose to, but it's also interesting. And then um, something would happen in our lives, and then somebody would make a video, and that would connect exactly to certain scenes that we saw or to certain things that we experienced, and the comprising of the art or what is real and what is a movie, and life being a movie, and so on and so forth. Um, the new forms of social media, while they gave way more opportunities of control over the content for content creators that didn't have that before, because in a studio, and then there was the attempt to adjoin the content creators to the system of control behind the studios, which was also a system of belonging. And um, and that creates a revolution in the place of the sovereign, or the sense of self within the film industry, or the big media, and the investment industry, the connection to funding. If I think about crowdfunding, where certain artists did crowdfunding, and then it was like, oh, some of them were also doing something, holding something to do with children. And in the aristocracy and elite, it was a way to, it was upbringing. Um, and so the thinning of the veil allows questioning the fundamentals of things, while also hopefully having points of interference as to change that. If Capricorn was, us telling our parents, "Hey, that's emotionally abusive, that's gaslighting," or, and then there would be the things behind that. Or why is a person not able to communicate, or people, it's kind of like what it seems like withdrawing affection, where they're getting into their shell. Um, and then suddenly it's like, well, that's something that at work is also being held accountable, and an entire system from work to therapy was had to completely rejuvenate. Even when it comes to the internet and let's say the astrological community, we talk more about Aquarius. Then in the past, people had to go through the rites of passage, which would be extortion cults, and in order to have the education, and they would only be exposed to certain type of occult that usually necessitated them experiencing first. And if a person is, I don't know, raped and tortured and is under mind control, now they're like, yeah, what is the gnosis? And then suddenly people could see the output of astrology, and comprise of their lives, and then try to see, well, okay, so um, outer planets hard aspects to inner planets is how the society makes it difficult to have relations, or relations that are revolutionary for the society. And then they didn't have to go through the rites of passage um, to get that information. And then they begin to notice that um, there was, suddenly they're like, yeah, I got into astrology because in academia, I felt like astrology is a better explanatory force than what I could portray in academia, um, and I felt like in academia they weren't speaking about those things. If somebody's raped in the astral, in astrology or magic traditions, or then people know what it is. There's a name for it. And then we say, yeah, I took a break because of the Me Too. I had to take a break from that place because I was targeted and I wasn't complying with that type of. And then you see silence. The silent wave. And so, and then there is also the thing of the veil of like, oh, a lot of people want to work with you. Amazing. We need to establish a culture that we are safe in. Now, here is the drama. Growing up in culture where everybody is unsafe in my usual, like what? How does a person become astrologer? The usual response to society is avoidance. This is how they get to the Deneb Algedi point. Because they said no to this, no to that, no to these societal groups, no to that, not because they don't like people. Yeah, we don't underdog like the underdog's underdog. Um, and suddenly there's a new concept of the underdog. Um, Definitely, there's going to be materialization of something new when it comes to communities, um, defending the underdogs, and being in a place that is way more decentralized. If we think about even the media conglomerates or big business sectors working as groups, and yet the the group culture um, has to sustain in a place, an environment that where, yes, there is friction, there is competition, there is um, how should I say that? And yet, the fact that it's going to be more decentralized, there's more place for everyone. And yet, the ritual abuse of salvation type of thing